The blizzard howled with almost personal animosity as it battered the lone cabin nestled between ancient pines. Inside, Mason Parker added another log to his fireplace, watching orange sparks perform their brief, joyful dance before disappearing into the darkness above. He'd named each log in his pile. This one was Herbert, a habit born from 3 years of speaking to no one but himself. The wind's mournful wail provided the soundtrack to his self-imposed exile, a decision made when city life and its associated tragedies became too much to bear. "Another thrilling Friday night, eh, Herbert?" Mason muttered as the log caught fire. His weathered fingers returned to tracing the edges of his leather-bound journal, filled with sketches of local wildlife and survival techniques he'd perfected since escaping civilization. His half-empty mug of tea, chamomile, not his favorite, but the only thing left after postponing his monthly supply run due to the storm, cooled beside him as he lost himself in the flames' hypnotic dance. The sound was so faint that Mason initially dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on his isolation-addled mind, perhaps a branch scraping against his window or a settling timber. But then it came again, 3 distinct taps against his door, deliberate and unmistakably real. "What the hell?" he whispered, eyeing the ancient grandfather clock that had come with the cabin. Its hands pointed accusingly at 12:43 a.m. Nobody in their right mind would be 15 miles deep in the Razorback Mountains during a blizzard, especially not at this ungodly hour. The tapping returned, weaker this time, almost hesitant. Mason's heart quickened as he set down his journal and reached for the hunting knife he kept nearby, not because he was paranoid, as he often told himself, but because living alone in the wilderness made pragmatism a survival trait. "Who's there?" he called, approaching the door with the caution of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. No answer came, only the persistent groan of the wind that seemed determined to strip the mountains bare. Mason's fingers hovered over the lock, common sense battling with curiosity and something else, something he couldn't quite name but felt like an invisible thread pulling him forward. When the door swung open, Arctic air rushed in with such force that Mason momentarily lost his vision to a swirl of snow and ice. As his eyes adjusted, his breath caught in his throat, the knife nearly slipping from suddenly numb fingers. A small figure swayed before him, barely visible against the storm's white canvas. Not human, that much was immediately apparent, even to Mason, who had actively avoided news about extraterrestrial visitors since first contact 8 years ago. Her skin gleamed a soft lavender in the spilled light from his cabin, almost luminescent against the snow. Her eyes, almond-shaped and unnervingly bright, reflected an iridescent silver that made them appear to be capturing and releasing moonlight. She wore what looked like tattered remnants of some uniform, its original purpose now lost beneath rips and stains. Ice crystals clung to her platinum-white hair, which hung in tangled knots around her delicate, heart-shaped face. Before Mason could speak, not that he had any idea what to say to an alien on his doorstep at midnight, her knees buckled. She collapsed forward with the slow-motion grace of a falling snowflake, and purely on instinct, Mason caught her slight form. She weighed almost nothing, like catching an armful of autumn leaves, her body alarmingly cold against his chest. "Hey, can you hear me?" Mason asked, giving her a gentle shake that seemed to have no effect as her eyes rolled back, consciousness deserting her. Well, this certainly wasn't covered in any of his wilderness survival manuals. Without hesitation, which would surprise him later when he had time to reflect, he kicked the door shut with his heel and carried her to the fireplace. Her breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps that reminded him of a wounded bird he'd once rehabilitated, each inhalation a small victory against death. He wrapped his thickest blanket around her trembling body, noting with growing concern the deep lacerations on her unprotected feet that had frozen over in the snow. Evidence of a desperate journey through terrain that would challenge even the most experienced hiker. "What in God's name happened to you?" Mason whispered, though he knew she couldn't answer. "And what cosmic joke led you to my door of all places?" Mason had done his best to ignore news about the Nazari species. Everyone on Earth had heard of them since first contact, of course. But he'd made an art form of tuning out developments that didn't directly affect his solitary existence. Their civilization had established diplomatic relations with humanity, trading advanced technology for Earth's abundant resources. but individual Nazari rarely ventured to Earth, and certainly not to remote wilderness regions where even humans seldom traveled. The nearest spaceport was hundreds of miles away in New Denver, a journey difficult for a well-equipped traveler, let alone someone in her condition. As he dabbed melting snow from her face with a warm cloth, Mason noticed the markings around her wrists, raw, purplish abrasions that told a story he didn't want to read but couldn't ignore. This wasn't a diplomatic visitor who had taken a wrong turn or a curious explorer mapping Earth's wilderness. This woman had been bound, imprisoned, and had somehow escaped, fleeing across impossible terrain in a desperate bid for freedom. She stirred slightly, murmuring incomprehensible sounds in what he assumed was her native tongue. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, widening with alarm when they focused on Mason, hovering above her. "Easy there," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. A universal gesture, he hoped. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe here." He attempted a reassuring smile that felt rusty on his face, unused as it was. She studied him with wary intensity, her gaze flicking between his face and his hands as if calculating threat levels. Then her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in her surroundings with the heightened awareness of prey assessing escape routes. Mason recognized that look. He'd seen it in the eyes of trapped animals, and once, years ago, in his own reflection. Moving slowly, telegraphing each motion, Mason retreated to his small kitchen area. He ladled hot vegetable broth from the pot he'd prepared for his own dinner into a ceramic bowl, the most non-threatening dish he could offer. When he returned, he knelt at a respectful distance, extending the bowl without entering her personal space. "You need to drink something," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "It'll help warm you from the inside out." The alien stared at the offering, uncertainty written in every line of her body. She sniffed once, reminding Mason of a cautious fox approaching unfamiliar food. Finally, with hands that trembled from either cold or fear, probably both, Mason thought, she accepted the bowl. Her first sip was tentative, barely wetting her lips, but hunger quickly overcame suspicion. She drank with increasing urgency, like someone who had survived on little more than hope for days. "Slow down there," Mason cautioned, though he doubted she understood. "There's plenty more." When she finished, exhaustion reclaimed her with the swiftness of an incoming tide. Her eyelids grew heavy, silver eyes dulling as consciousness began to slip away. She slumped against the chair leg beside her, the empty bowl cradled against her chest like something precious. Within moments, she had surrendered to sleep, her breathing settling into the uneven rhythm of one who remains vigilant even in unconsciousness. Mason gently retrieved the bowl and covered her with a second blanket. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he maintained the fire, occasionally checking her pulse and temperature, all while his mind raced through scenarios, each more troubling than the last. Who had imprisoned her? How had she escaped? What cosmic coincidence, or fate, if one believed in such things, had brought her to his doorstep of all places in the vast wilderness? The bruises on her arms told of recent violence. The cuts on her feet spoke of desperate flight. Her emaciated frame whispered of prolonged neglect. But most troubling were the hints of deliberate cruelty, marks too precise to be accidental, too systematic to be anything but intentional. "Whatever they did to you," Mason promised the sleeping stranger, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire, "they won't find you here." A bold promise, perhaps even a foolish one, but in that moment he meant every word. Dawn arrived with merciful gentleness, pale light filtering through frost-covered windows like a hesitant visitor. Mason, bleary-eyed from his vigilant night, prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal wheatiness with the last of his wild honey. The familiar routine felt suddenly strange, as if the presence of his unexpected guest had transformed even the most mundane tasks into something new and unfamiliar. The scent of food seemed to rouse his visitor, who woke with a startled gasp, immediately pressing herself against the wall, blankets clutched to her chest like a shield. "Whoa, easy," Mason said calmly, staying where he sat across the room. "It's just morning. You're still in my cabin, still safe." Her eyes, alert now despite her weakened state, registered the daylight, the food, and finally Mason himself. Recognition dawned slowly, and with it, a marginal relaxation of her defensive posture, though wariness remained etched in every line of her body. "I made breakfast," Mason said, gesturing to the steaming bowl he'd placed on a small table near her. "Nothing fancy, but it'll help." When she hesitated, he added, "Please, eat. You need strength." He pantomimed eating, feeling slightly ridiculous but determined to bridge the communication gap. She reached for the bowl with the same careful movements as the night before, pausing mid-motion as if seeking permission. Mason nodded encouragingly, and this small gesture seemed to reassure her. She ate with the same desperate efficiency as before, though this time she seemed more aware of her surroundings, her gaze periodically returning to Mason as if to ensure he hadn't moved closer. After she finished, Mason decided to attempt basic communication. He tapped his chest gently. "Mason," he said clearly, enunciating each syllable. The alien watched him with intelligent eyes that belied her fragile physical state. He repeated the gesture. "Mason." After a moment's contemplation, she mimicked the sound, her voice barely audible, like wind through dried leaves. "Mason." He smiled, nodding. "Yes, and you?" He gestured toward her. She lowered her gaze, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself as if trying to disappear within its folds. No response came, just a slight tremor that ran through her slender frame. Mason retrieved a notebook and pencil from his desk. With quick strokes, he sketched a simple figure meant to represent himself, writing Mason beneath it. Then he drew a second figure with large eyes and wrote a question mark. The alien studied the drawing with an intensity that suggested she was solving a complex equation rather than looking at a crude stick figure. After what seemed like minutes of internal debate, she whispered a sound, melodic and complex, with tonal qualities that Mason's human ear struggled to capture. "Veala?" he attempted, knowing he was probably butchering the pronunciation. A faint light kindled in her eyes, the first positive emotion he'd seen from her, and she nodded once, the movement so slight he might have missed it if he hadn't been watching carefully. "Veala," Mason repeated more confidently. "You're safe here, Veala. No one will hurt you now." Though she couldn't understand his words, something in his tone must have resonated. Her shoulders lowered slightly, the constant tension momentarily abating like ice beginning to thaw under spring sunshine. But as Mason looked into those silver eyes, now studying him with cautious curiosity, he couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival marked only the beginning of something much larger. Whatever or whoever had driven Veala to flee through a blizzard to his isolated cabin wouldn't simply disappear. Sooner or later, they would come looking for what they had lost. And Mason, who had spent 3 years avoiding complications of any kind, had just invited the universe's most complicated situation to take shelter by his fire. "Well," he muttered to himself with grim humor as he collected her empty bowl, "at least I can't complain about being bored anymore." The days passed with cautious rhythm. Veala remained largely silent, observing Mason's every movement with the hyper-vigilance of someone accustomed to anticipating threats. She flinched at sudden noises, the crack of firewood, the howl of wind against the cabin walls, her body instinctively coiling like a spring ready to launch her toward safety. Mason gave her space, never approaching too quickly or making unexpected movements. He noticed how she watched his hands constantly, as if assessing whether they would strike or soothe. The revelation broke something inside him, awakening protective instincts he thought had died alongside his former life. On the third morning, while Veala dozed fitfully by the fire, Mason rummaged through an old trunk containing items he'd brought from his previous life but rarely used. At the bottom, beneath thermal gear and outdated technology, he found what he was looking for, a handcrafted quilt his grandmother had made before she passed away. The fabric was soft with age and use, the pattern depicting a night sky over mountains, remarkably similar to the view outside his cabin window. Rather than handing it directly to her when she woke, he placed it halfway between them on the floor, a neutral territory offering. "This is warmer," he explained, keeping his voice gentle, "and softer than that old wool blanket. My grandmother made it." Veala observed the offering without moving, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she remained perfectly still, her silver eyes shifting between the quilt and Mason as if searching for the trap hidden within this simple kindness. Then, with deliberate slowness that spoke of calculated risk assessment, she extended her slender arm and pulled the quilt toward herself. As she wrapped it around her shoulders, Mason glimpsed the ghost of relief in her expression, a momentary softening around her eyes that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. I'm not offended that you don't trust me, Mason said conversationally as he settled back in his chair, maintaining the distance she clearly needed. Smart, actually. Trust should be earned, not given. He smiled slightly. Though I should warn you, I'm probably the least threatening person in these mountains. Even the rabbits laugh at me behind my back. Throughout the day, Mason sketched in his journal. Simple images of birds, trees, mountains, while keeping Veala in his peripheral vision. He felt her curious gaze and occasionally looked up to find her watching him, though she quickly averted her eyes when caught, as if observation itself might be punishable. Would you like to see? He asked eventually, turning the journal toward her. Her curiosity visibly battled with caution. After a brief internal struggle, curiosity won. She inched closer, moving with the careful deliberation of someone crossing thin ice, and peered at his drawings. Mason flipped to a fresh page and sketched a simple cabin with two stick figures beside it. He pointed to one, Mason, then to the other smaller figure with distinctive eyes. Veala. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps even the faintest trace of belonging. Her fingertip hovered over the drawing, trembling slightly before making contact with the paper. The touch was fleeting, as if testing whether such a connection was permitted. You belong here now, Mason said softly. For as long as you need. Veala's lips parted, forming shapes that produced no sound. Then she withdrew into herself again, clutching the quilt around her shoulders like armor against vulnerability. Mason understood. Trust would come slowly, if at all. Whatever nightmare she had escaped had taught her that safety was temporary, kindness conditional. He'd learned similar lessons himself, though he suspected his education had been gentler than hers. That evening, he prepared a simple meal of roasted vegetables and dried venison from last autumn's hunting. He placed a portion on a plate for Veala and set it on the table. Instead of retreating to his usual spot, he busied himself with organizing tools on the far shelf, giving her privacy to approach the food. From the corner of his eye, he saw her rise cautiously, quilt still draped around her shoulders like a royal mantle. She took the plate with both hands, returning to her place by the fire. She ate methodically, carefully, as if each bite might be her last. You know, Mason remarked, keeping his voice light as he arranged screwdrivers by size. Before you arrived, I used to talk to my firewood, named each log and everything. Herbert, Ferdinand, Wilhelmina, if it was a particularly naughty piece. He glanced over his shoulder with a self-deprecating smile. So even if you don't speak, you're still better company than I've had in years. The ghost of a smile touched Veala's lips, so brief he might have imagined it, before she returned her attention to her food. But something had shifted, imperceptibly but definitely, in the atmosphere between them. Mason had spent years cultivating solitude, building walls around himself after the accident that claimed his partner's life. He had fled civilization, human connection, responsibility. Yet now, watching this wounded alien woman holding herself together with fragile dignity, he felt something long dormant stirring within him, the impulse to protect, to care, to remain present rather than retreat. That night, Mason arranged cushions and blankets into a comfortable bed near the fire for Veala. As he turned to leave her to rest, he felt a sudden tug on his sleeve. He looked down to find her delicate fingers clutching the fabric, her eyes wide with unspoken fear. Do you want me to stay? He asked gently. She didn't nod, didn't speak, but her grip remained tight, communicating what words could not. Understanding, Mason settled himself in the chair nearby. Only then did her fingers slowly release his sleeve, though the anxiety didn't leave her eyes. It's okay, he said, settling into the chair. I'm not going anywhere, though fair warning, I snore sometimes. Herbert, the log, told me so. As the fire cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, Mason watched Veala's breathing gradually slow and deepen. Even in sleep, she clutched the quilt tightly, as if it might be snatched away at any moment. He didn't know who she was or what series of horrors had led her to his door, but in that moment, he made a silent promise. To this stranger from beyond the stars, he would be the safety she had been denied. Morning arrived with Veala's first nightmare. Mason was preparing breakfast when he heard her labored breathing. He turned to find her trembling violently, tears streaming silently down her lavender cheeks. Her eyes were open but unseeing, trapped in some terrible memory he couldn't share. Vayala, he called softly, approaching slowly. Vayala, you're safe. You're here with me, in the cabin. She didn't respond, lost in whatever horror had reclaimed her. Her small fists clenched the blankets, knuckles turning pale lilac with the force of her grip. Though she made almost no sound, her silent tears spoke volumes. Mason knelt at a distance, careful not to crowd her. It's over, he said, infusing his voice with calm certainty. Whatever happened, you survived it. You're here now. Gradually, awareness returned to her eyes. Her gaze focused on Mason, recognition slowly dawning. Her breathing steadied, though tears continued to trace silvery paths down her face. It was then that Mason noticed the marks on her wrists more clearly in the morning light. Not just abrasions from restraints, but deliberate patterns, brands burned into her skin. The sight ignited a quiet fury within him. I have to know, he said gently, if only so I can help. He took his notebook and sketched again. This time he drew chains, then a figure wearing them. He showed it to Vayala, his question unspoken but clear. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She recoiled as if the drawing itself might bind her, her silver eyes clouding with remembered pain. She looked away, but her body's tension confirmed what Mason already suspected. He erased the drawing quickly and replaced it with a new sketch. A figure breaking free of chains, standing tall. Beside it, he wrote, "Free safe." Vayala studied this new image for a long time. With hesitant movements, she traced her finger over the freed figure. Then, barely audible, she whispered a word. Nishara. Mason tilted his head questioningly. She touched the chained figure in his earlier drawing, then repeated, Nishara. After a pause, she added another word that sounded like property. Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. Nishara, slave, possession, property. That's what she had been called, what she had been made to believe she was. No, Mason said firmly, shaking his head. You are Vayala, not Nishara, never Nishara. He ripped the page with the chains from his notebook, crumpled it, and tossed it into the fire where it caught immediately, turning to ash. Something in his vehemence seemed to reach her. The faintest glimmer of hope flickered in her eyes, so brief he might have imagined it. Mason stood and retrieved a small box from his workbench. Inside were various metal pieces, tools, and wire, remnants of his previous life as an engineer before grief had driven him to the mountains. He selected a small metal ring and showed it to Vayala. She watched, confused, as he placed the ring on the table between them. Then, with deliberate movements, he bent the metal until it snapped in half. He pushed the broken pieces toward her. Broken chains, he said, meeting her gaze. Never again. Vayala stared at the broken metal. Slowly, she reached forward and touched the pieces. Then, to Mason's surprise, she picked up another small ring and bent it until it too broke apart. When she looked up, the ghost of a smile touched her lips, fragile but genuine. That's right, Mason encouraged, smiling back. Between the two of us, we could break all the chains in the universe, starting with yours. That evening, as darkness reclaimed the mountains, Vayala sat closer to Mason than she had before. She observed with evident fascination as he repaired a solar lamp, her eyes tracking each tool he used. When he offered her a small screwdriver, she hesitated only briefly before accepting it. Careful with that, Mason said with mock seriousness. That's my second best screwdriver. Had to give Ferdinand the log my best one after I stepped on his branch. Vayala looked at him with confusion that slowly transformed into comprehension. And then, a miracle, she laughed. Just a small sound, barely a chuckle, but unmistakably a laugh. The sound transformed her face, erasing years of suffering in an instant of genuine mirth. They worked in companionable silence after that, the barrier of language less significant than the shared purpose of the moment. Vayala mimicked Mason's movements with surprising dexterity, revealing an innate mechanical aptitude that spoke of intelligence and training. Later, as Mason prepared her sleeping area with fresh blankets, something extraordinary happened. Mason, Vayala said, her voice stronger than before. He looked up, surprised. She placed a hand over her heart. Vayala. Mason smiled broadly. Yes. Vayala. Then with visible effort, she formed another phrase. Thank you. The simple words, so commonplace in human interaction, struck Mason with unexpected force. After everything she had endured, after being treated as less than a person, Vayala was reaching across the vast gulf between their worlds to connect. You're welcome, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Though really I should thank you. This place was just a shelter before. You've made it something else. But as he watched her settle into sleep that night, Mason couldn't ignore the growing unease in his gut. Vayala had escaped from somewhere, from someone, and in his experience, those who viewed others as property rarely surrendered their claims without a fight. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the windows with renewed vigor. Mason added another log to the fire. Welcome to the party, Bartholomew, and settled in for another night of watchful vigilance. The peaceful days that followed almost made Mason forget the danger. Vayala grew steadily stronger, both physically and in spirit. She no longer cowered when he entered a room. She had learned several human words: warm, water, safe, night, each one celebrated with a smile that transformed her face. She particularly enjoyed helping Mason sort and organize his tools, displaying a methodical precision that spoke of an ordered mind beneath the trauma. The flashlight became her favorite possession. She would click it on and off, watching the beam cut through darkness with childlike wonder. You know, Mason commented as he watched her experiment with the light's focus, I think you might be overqualified as my assistant engineer. I barely know which end of a hammer to hold. Vayala looked up, confusion furrowing her brow. Then she deliberately turned the flashlight around, pointing the wrong end toward the wall and clicking the button with exaggerated puzzlement. Mason burst out laughing, and after a moment, Vayala joined him, her laughter still hesitant, but genuine. For Mason, witnessing her gradual emergence from fear was its own reward. Each small victory, her first unprompted smile, the morning she chose to sit at the table rather than the floor, the night she slept peacefully without nightmares, filled him with quiet satisfaction. But their fragile peace shattered on the seventh night. Mason was outside gathering firewood when he heard it, a low mechanical hum that didn't belong to the wilderness. It reverberated through the clearing, vibrating in his chest like the bass note of some massive instrument. Above the tree line, unnatural lights pierced the clouds, moving with deliberate purpose. Not aircraft, not drones, something much larger, much more advanced. Oh, hell, Mason muttered, dropping an armful of logs. Goodbye, Edgar and Penelope, and sprinting for the cabin. Vayala, he shouted as he burst through the door. She was already standing, her body rigid with terror. She didn't need to see the lights to know what they meant. She had heard the sound before. They found me, she whispered, her limited English abandoned in panic. Mason locked the door and moved quickly to the far corner of the cabin. He pulled back a rug, revealing a trap door leading to a small root cellar he had dug his first winter. Down here, he urged, lifting the door. Quickly! Vayala shook her head frantically, panic etched across her features. Not alone, she pleaded. Mason grasped her shoulders gently. I'll keep you safe, he promised, but I need you hidden. These visitors don't seem like the type to accept a polite no thank you. Something in his attempt at humor amid crisis reached her. With visible effort, she mastered her fear and descended into the darkness below. Mason closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug, then extinguished all lights except one small lamp. The humming grew louder, the cabin walls vibrating with its intensity. Then came the knock, not the desperate plea of Vayala's arrival, but a commanding mechanical rhythm that shook the entire structure. Mason approached the door, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Who's there? He called, feigning ignorance while slipping his hand beneath the side table where he kept a weapon that hadn't seen use since his military days. A voice responded, artificially modulated, emotionless. We seek retrieval of specimen KB7, female Nazari, escape containment. Sensors indicate presence at this location. Specimen? Mason repeated, his tone deliberately confused. I'm afraid you've got the wrong cabin. There's no one here but me and my collection of talking firewood. Incorrect statement, the voice replied, entirely missing Mason's attempt at humor. Biological signature confirmed. Open the entrance for authorized retrieval. This is private property, Mason countered, his hand now firmly gripping the weapon beneath the table. You have no authority here. I suggest you leave before this gets complicated. A pause followed, then, final notice. Surrender the specimen or face extraction protocols. Mason's other hand moved to the concealed panel beside the door, a security system he had installed during his more paranoid days after first arriving in the mountains. His finger hovered over the activation switch. She's not a specimen, he said, voice hard with controlled rage. She's a person with a name, with rights. She doesn't belong to you or anyone else. And I'm really not in the mood for uninvited guests who can't take a hint. The unit is registered property of the Zenith Consortium, the voice stated flatly. Interference is a violation of interstellar commerce statutes. Commerce? Mason's finger pressed to the switch. She's not merchandise, and I've always been terrible at following statutes. Outside, hidden pressure plates activated beneath the snow. A high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by the distinctive crackle of an electromagnetic pulse, a remnant of Mason's military career that he'd never expected to use again. Something heavy struck the door with tremendous force, but the reinforced frame held. Mason had built this cabin himself with the paranoia of someone who had seen combat and never quite shook the feeling that danger might find him again. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of Mason's ragged breathing. Then the voice returned, distorted now by static. You shield contraband that does not belong in your possession. The consortium does not forget interference. We will return with proper authorization. And I'll be here, Mason replied, though he doubted they were still listening. Bring a warrant next time, and maybe some manners. Heavy footsteps retreated, and gradually the mechanical humming faded. Only when the night had returned to its natural silence did Mason open the trap door. Vayala emerged from the darkness, trembling but unharmed. Gone? She asked, voice barely audible. For now, Mason answered honestly, helping her up. They didn't seem too happy about my security system. Apparently, it's rude to EMP uninvited guests. She collapsed against him then, her slender frame racked with silent sobs. Others, she managed between breaths, many others, still there. Mason held her gently, rage and sorrow mingling in his chest. The consortium, he said. They kept you prisoner? Vayala nodded against his shoulder. Collectors, she whispered. They take, they use, they sell. The revelation struck Mason like a physical blow. The Nazari were known to humanity as advanced, peaceful traders. But clearly, darker forces operated in the shadows of interstellar relations. Slavers trafficking in sentient beings, hiding their crimes behind corporate facades. They won't take you again, Mason promised, though he knew the declaration might prove hollow. The consortium had found her once. They would return with greater force. Though I might need to upgrade from an EMP to something with a bit more bite. Vayala pulled back slightly, her silver eyes searching his face. Why help? She asked, the simple question containing worlds of confusion. Why risk? Mason considered his answer carefully. Maybe because for 3 years I've been hiding from everything. Maybe it's time I stood for something instead. The morning light seemed colder somehow, the safety of the cabin compromised by the previous night's intrusion. Vayala sat by the window, unnaturally still, watching snowflakes spiral down from leaden skies. She hadn't touched her breakfast. Mason noticed her fingers trembling again, a regression to her state when she first arrived. The progress of days had unraveled in hours, fear reclaiming territory so painstakingly won. He sat across from her, allowing silence to stretch between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. I should leave. They will return. Mason looked up sharply. Leave? Where would you go? She shrugged, a human gesture she had adopted. Away. They want me, not you. If I go, you safe. The simple logic twisted in Mason's chest like a knife. He moved closer, kneeling beside her chair to meet her eyes. Vayala, listen to me. You're not responsible for their actions. This isn't your fault. She met his gaze, silver eyes clouded with resignation. They hurt anyone who helps. They will hurt you. I saw it before. Mason sighed, running a hand through his beard. Maybe, he admitted, but that doesn't mean I'll let you walk back into their hands. I didn't survive 3 tours in the Continental Defense Force just to hand over someone who needs protection. Continental Defense Force? Vayala repeated, the English words clumsy on her tongue. Mason nodded, surprised he'd mentioned it. He rarely spoke of his military past. Before I came here, I was a soldier, then an engineer, then, he gestured vaguely, a hermit who talks to firewood. What happened? She asked, genuine curiosity temporarily displacing fear. Mason looked away. I lost someone. My partner, Alex, engineering accident while testing new defense systems. I was supposed to run the safety protocols, but he swallowed hard. I took a shortcut. Understanding dawned in Vayala's eyes. You blame yourself. Every day, Mason admitted. So I came here where I couldn't hurt anyone else. But you helped me, she said softly. Mason smiled sadly. Maybe that's why. Maybe the universe decided I needed a chance to get something right for once. Vayala considered this, her head tilted slightly. I am trouble, she whispered again. No, Mason said firmly. You are not trouble. You are Vayala. And trouble is what's coming for the Zenith Consortium when I report what they've been doing. She looked down, fingers tracing the faded brand on her wrist. Before Nishara, I had another name, a real name. Mason waited, giving her space to continue. They said no one would want Broken Thing, said I was nothing without them. Anger flashed through Mason, quickly replaced by compassion. He stood and walked to his bookshelf, retrieving a small wooden box inlaid with copper wire. When he returned, he sat beside Vayala and opened it. Inside lay various mementos, a tarnished medal, a folded photograph, and a small carving of an eagle with one wing broken and carefully repaired. See this? Mason said, lifting the eagle. My father carved this when I was 10. During an argument with my brother, it fell and broke. I was devastated, thought it was ruined forever. Vayala watched as he turned the carving in his hands, revealing the fine crack where the wing had been reattached. My father didn't throw it away, Mason continued. He said, what's broken can be mended. What's damaged still has worth. We fixed it together. He placed the eagle in Vayala's palm. The break is part of its story now, not its definition. She cradled the carving with reverent care, her finger tracing the repaired seam. Mason leaned closer, his voice gentle but firm. You've been hurt, Vayala, terribly hurt. But that doesn't diminish your value or your right to freedom, to safety, to belonging. Her breath caught on that last word. Belonging, she repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. I want you to stay, Mason said simply. Not because I pity you or because I feel responsible, because in this short time, you've made this cabin feel like something it hasn't in years. What? She asked, genuinely curious. A home, he answered. Though I'm starting to think we might need to relocate to somewhere with better security and fewer nosy interstellar corporations. Maybe somewhere with actual neighbors who don't arrive via spaceship. That afternoon, Mason reinforced the cabin's defenses. He installed additional locks, checked his perimeter alerts, and moved furniture to create barriers against forced entry. Vayala watched his preparations, her expression solemn but no longer paralyzed by fear. As dusk approached, she joined him at the table for dinner, a simple stew that filled the cabin with savory aromas. For the first time, she sat across from him, not as a guest or refugee, but as an equal sharing a meal. They will come back, she said matter-of-factly, voicing the thought that had shadowed them both. Mason nodded, seeing no point in false reassurances. Yes, they probably will, with friends, lawyers, and a very bad attitude. You could give me to them, she suggested, her tone clinical, detached. It would end danger to you. Mason set down his spoon, meeting her gaze directly. Vayala, listen carefully. I will never give you to them. Not for peace, not for safety, not for anything. Though I appreciate your willingness to throw yourself to the corporate wolves on my behalf. Very noble, but absolutely not happening. Something shifted in her expression, a slight widening of eyes, a parting of lips in surprise. You truly mean that? It wasn't a question, but Mason answered anyway. With every fiber of my being. Besides, I've already contacted an old military buddy who works for Earth's Diplomatic Security Service. The consortium's about to have much bigger problems than one escaped specimen. Vayala's eyes widen. You called authorities? Mason nodded. While you were resting, sent images of your injuries, your brand, everything. Turns out Earth takes a pretty dim view of slavery, even when it's dressed up in corporate jargon. And the official Nazari government might be interested to know what's happening to their citizens. Dangerous, Vayala whispered. The consortium has power. So do I, Mason replied with a grim smile. And unlike them, I have nothing left to lose. He paused, then corrected himself. Actually, that's not true anymore. I have something very important to protect now. Vayala considered his words, turning them over in her mind like precious stones. Finally, she nodded once, decisive. All I need, then I stay. Fight if needed. Mason smiled, relief and determination mingling in his chest. Together, though let's hope it doesn't come to an actual fight. My combat skills are a bit rusty, and I think Herbert the Log would make a terrible weapon. That night, for the first time, Vayala slept in Mason's bed while he took the couch. Before retiring, she placed the wooden eagle on the nightstand, positioning it so the repaired wing caught the moonlight filtering through the window. Outside, Mason stood on the porch, watching stars emerge from behind dispersing clouds. The consortium would return, that much was certain. When they did, he would need more than improvised defenses and determination. But for tonight, the mountain stood silent, protective around their small sanctuary. And for the first time in 3 years, Mason didn't feel alone with his ghosts. Days passed in watchful peace. Vayala grew stronger, her movements more confident, her voice steadier when she spoke. She practiced English diligently, adding new words to her vocabulary each day. Though her sentences remained simple, her thoughts were anything but. One evening, while organizing Mason's toolbox, she discovered an old portable music player. "What this?" she asked, holding it up. Mason smiled. "Music," he said, taking it and pressing play. A gentle melody filled the cabin, piano notes cascading like water over stones. Vayala's reaction was immediate and profound. Her eyes widened, lips parting in wonder as she moved closer to the device. Her fingers hovered over it, feeling the vibrations in the air. "Beautiful," she whispered. "You like music?" Mason asked. She nodded, a faraway look entering her eyes. "We had before." Mason set the player down. "Before the consortium?" Another nod, more hesitant this time. "My world." We sang. Always sang. It was the first time she had volunteered information about her past, about her home. Mason sat beside her, careful not to break the moment with excessive curiosity. "Would you tell me?" he asked simply. Vayala's gaze remained fixed on the music player, but her mind had traveled much farther. "My true name," she began softly. "Not Vayala, not Nishara." She spoke a sequence of sounds, melodic, complex, impossible for Mason's human tongue to reproduce perfectly. "It means one who sings to star," she translated. "In my language." "It's beautiful," Mason said truthfully. "Much better than Herbert." A hint of a smile touched her lips at his joke, but quickly faded. "They took it, said too difficult too." She searched for the word, too alien, gave me Nishara instead, property designation. Mason's fists clenched involuntarily. They had no right. "Took everything," she continued, the words coming faster now. "Name, home, family. Said I was nothing. No rights. No self." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the brand he had glimpsed before. A series of angular marks burned into her skin. "Inventory mark," she explained, voice hollow. "Shows owner. Price paid." Mason fought to control the rage building inside him. "You are not inventory," he said, each word deliberate and firm. "That mark doesn't define you. It defines them as monsters." Vayala covered the brand again, her fingers lingering on the fabric. "I believe them," she admitted. "After time, I thought maybe they right. Maybe I am nothing." Mason shook his head emphatically. "They lied about everything, and they are going to pay for it." She looked up, her silver eyes searching his face for deception, for ulterior motives, finding none. How can you be sure? Because I see you, Mason answered simply. Not what they made you believe you are, just you. And what I see is someone extraordinary who survived the unsurvivable. Something broke inside Viola then, not in destruction, but in release. For the first time since her arrival, she wept openly, without shame or fear, the tears of someone rediscovering pieces of herself long thought lost. Mason didn't try to stop her tears or offer empty comfort. He simply remained present, a steady witness to her reclamation of grief, of memory, of self. Later, as the fire burned low and the music played on, Viola did something unexpected. She sang, a single wavering note at first, then a melody that seemed to rise and fall like the wind through mountain passes. The language was unknown to Mason, but the emotion transcended words. It was a lament, a remembrance, a declaration. In singing, Viola reclaimed something the consortium had tried to erase: her voice, her heritage, her identity beyond their definitions. When the final note faded into silence, Mason realized he had been holding his breath. That was, he began, but words failed him. Viola met his gaze, something new shining in her eyes. Pride, perhaps, or the first fragile strands of reborn dignity. I remember, she said simply. I'd like to hear more, Mason replied quietly, whenever you're ready to share it. The days that followed brought subtle but significant changes. Viola moved differently, her steps more purposeful, her posture straighter. She began arranging her sleeping area herself, making small adjustments that transformed it from a refugee's cot to a personal space. Mason found an old brush and helped her untangle her platinum hair, which had begun to shine with renewed health. As he worked, she told him fragments of her past, her younger sister who had been taken first, the colors of the twin moons over her homeworld, the flowering trees that sang in the wind during harvest season. Memory by memory, word by word, Viola reconstructed herself. Not as she had been before, that person was gone, transformed by suffering and survival, but as someone new, someone who carried both her heritage and her journey. Mason listened, offering neither pity nor false understanding, simply the gift of attentive witness. In his company, Viola found something she had believed forever lost: the freedom to be herself, however fractured, however changed. You know, Mason said one evening as they sat by the fire, my grandmother used to say that scars are just the places where we've been sewn back together. Makes us stronger in the broken places. Viola considered this. Your grandmother, wise woman. She was, Mason agreed. She also used to cheat terribly at cards and blame it on her poor eyesight. No one's perfect. The unexpected comment startled a laugh from Viola, fuller than before, uninhibited. The sound transformed the cabin, bringing life to spaces that had known only silence and solitude for too long. But even as they built this new routine, this careful peace, both remained vigilant. The consortium's threat lingered like storm clouds on the horizon. Not if, but when. The warning came on a clear night, 10 days after the first encounter. Mason's perimeter sensors triggered, their silent alarm flashing on his datapad. He checked the readings, multiple heat signatures approaching from the North Ridge. Viola, he called softly, urgent but controlled. They're coming. She appeared in the doorway, face calm despite the fear that flickered in her eyes. Without a word, she began gathering essentials: food, water, the portable lamp she had repaired herself. The basement, Mason directed, already moving furniture to barricade the main entrance. Viola paused, her back straight, her chin lifted. No, she said firmly. Mason turned, surprised. Viola, it's not safe. Hiding didn't save others, she interrupted. Hiding didn't stop them before. She approached him, determination hardening her delicate features. I faced them. With you. Mason recognized the resolution in her stance. This wasn't reckless bravery or fatalism, but a conscious choice to stand rather than flee, to claim agency rather than submit to circumstance. He nodded slowly. Together then, though for the record, I think this is a terrible idea. The best kind, but still terrible. They positioned themselves near the reinforced door, Mason with his electromagnetic pulse rifle, a relic from his military days, and Viola with a makeshift staff fashioned from hardwood and metal. The approaching hum grew louder, mechanical and relentless. Outside, trees creaked and snow shifted as something massive descended into the clearing. The cabin walls vibrated with the proximity of engines never meant for Earth's atmosphere. Then came the knock. 3 measured impacts that shook dust from the rafters. Mason exchanged a final glance with Vayala. She nodded once, her expression serene despite the danger. He unbolted the door and opened it, weapon raised. 3 figures stood in the snow-covered clearing, taller than humans, their bodies encased in articulated armor that gleamed iridescent in the moonlight. The leader stepped forward, faceplate sliding back to reveal features similar to Vayala's but harder, masculine, devoid of emotion. "Return asset KV-7 for immediate extraction," the figure stated, voice amplified and flat. "Final warning." Mason held his ground. "There is no asset KV-7 here. There is only Vayala, a free person who makes her own choices." The alien's eyes narrowed. "The specimen is registered property of the Zenith Consortium under Galactic Trade Article 27. Surrender immediately or face retrieval force." "She's not property," Mason countered, anger simmering beneath his controlled tone. "She's a sentient being with rights recognized under Earth's sovereign protection laws." The leader raised a device that hummed with ominous energy. "Earth laws do not supersede consortium claims. Step aside, human." Actually, came a new voice from behind the alien delegation. "They do when the violation occurs on Earth soil." All heads turned to see a group of figures emerging from the tree line. Humans in the distinctive uniform of Earth's Diplomatic Security Service, accompanied by tall, elegant Nazari in formal attire that marked them as government officials. "Captain Lena Rodriguez, DSS," announced the lead human, a compact woman whose relaxed stance belied her obvious readiness for conflict. "And Ambassador Talith of the Nazari High Council, we received some very interesting evidence about consortium activities that violate about 17 different treaties." The consortium leader lowered his weapon slightly, clearly reassessing the situation. "This is a private business matter." "Slavery is not business," interrupted the Nazari ambassador, his voice melodic but sharp with controlled rage. "It is a crime against sentience itself." Vayala stepped forward, positioning herself beside Mason rather than behind. "I speak for myself," she said, her voice steady despite its softness. The consortium agents exchanged uneasy glances as the DSS officers moved to flank them. "Property does not speak," the leader stated, but uncertainty had crept into his tone. Vayala took another step forward, her slight frame dwarfed by the armored figures yet somehow dominating the confrontation through sheer moral force. "I am not property," she declared. "I have name, true name. I have voice. I have rights." She pointed to the brand on her arm, now exposed purposefully. "This mark does not make me yours. It marks your crime." Captain Rodriguez moved forward. "We have warrants to inspect all consortium facilities on Earth and in Earth orbit. Ambassador Talith has similar authority within Nazari space. This operation is over." For several tense moments, no one spoke. The winter wind whipped around them, carrying snowflakes that melted against the aliens' heated armor. Finally, the consortium leader lowered his weapon completely. "The consortium will challenge this intervention." "Good luck with that," Rodriguez replied dryly. "Trafficking charges tend to stick, especially with physical evidence and eyewitness testimony. Your shareholders might have some questions about your extracurricular activities." As the consortium agents were escorted away, Mason felt Vayala's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, feeling the tremors that belied her outward calm. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head slightly. "We did it. Together." Ambassador Talith approached them, his silver eyes so similar to Vayala's, filled with profound sorrow. "Child of Nazari," he said gently in their native tongue, "your suffering ends today. Many others have been freed. You are not alone." Vayala's composure finally broke. She trembled violently, reactions setting in after such tremendous courage. Mason supported her as the ambassador continued. "When you are ready, your homeworld awaits, but healing must come first." Mason led her inside, closing the door behind them. "You were incredible," he said, voice filled with admiration. Vayala sank into a chair, her breathing rapid but gradually steadying. "I was terrified." "That's what makes it brave," Mason replied, kneeling beside her, "doing it anyway." She looked at him, silver eyes bright with unshed tears and newfound strength. They will pay now for all they did. Yes, Mason agreed. Justice is coming, slowly, maybe, but it's coming. Vayala nodded, resolution replacing fear. Others are free too, not just me. Your testimony helped make that happen, Mason said. You didn't just save yourself. You saved everyone like you. What happens now? Vayala asked softly. Mason shrugged. That's up to you. The ambassador said your homeworld is waiting. You could go back if you want. A shadow crossed her face. Not ready. Too many memories. Then stay, Mason said simply. For as long as you need. Forever if you want. That night, Vayala didn't retreat to her separate sleeping area. Instead, she sat with Mason by the fire, their shoulders touching lightly as they contemplated the future. The danger had passed, the immediate threat neutralized, though the road to full justice would be long. But something fundamental had changed. Vayala was no longer running from. She was moving toward. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in gentle rose and gold, Vayala stood at the cabin window. Her reflection in the glass showed a transformed being, still bearing the marks of her ordeal, but standing straight, eyes clear and determined. Mason joined her, offering a steaming mug of tea. Beautiful morning, and he observed. Vayala nodded, accepting the drink with both hands as had become her habit. New day, she agreed. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun's ascent. After a time, Vayala spoke again, her voice soft but certain. Thank you, Mason. He glanced at her, questioning. For what? For seeing me, she answered simply, when I could not see myself. Mason's throat tightened with emotion. You were always there, he said. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us who we are when we forget. Vayala turned from the window to face him fully. I stay, she said. Not because I need shelter, because I choose here. With you. Mason smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with genuine joy. I was hoping you'd say that. Though I should warn you, I'm still going to talk to the firewood occasionally. Old habits die hard. Vayala laughed, the sound no longer hesitant or guarded, but full and free. I talk to them too. Herbert is my favorite. Outside, the new day continued to unfold across the wilderness. Birds called from snow-laden branches. Wind whispered through the pines, and in a small cabin nestled among the mountains, two beings from different worlds shared the quiet miracle of beginning again. In the months that followed, their story became part of a larger narrative, a catalyst for change that rippled through human-Nazari relations. The consortium's operations were exposed, facilities shut down, victims freed and offered rehabilitation. Vayala testified remotely, her voice joining others to ensure justice would not be partial or temporary. Mason transformed too. The hermit who had fled responsibility found purpose in supporting Vayala and others like her. His engineering skills, dormant for years, awakened to help design communication systems for survivors separated from their families. The cabin expanded, a new room added, a workshop built, a garden planted when spring arrived. No longer a shelter from the world, but a place to heal before returning to it. And on quiet evenings when work was done and the mountain winds sang around their home, Vayala would sometimes lift her voice in the songs of her people. Mason would listen, entranced, as she reclaimed piece by piece the heritage that had nearly been stolen from her. Home, Vayala said one evening, the word both statement and question, as they stood on the porch watching twin shooting stars trace parallel paths across the night sky.